Today's story takes place on February 14th, 2010, in Korea. Around noon, a young man in his 20s stood anxiously in front of an apartment door in Yangju, Gyeonggi Province. He was the eldest son of 43-year-old Ms. Kim, a woman who lived there with her younger son. For the past week, he had been unable to reach his mother. At first, he wasn't too alarmed. She often ignored his texts or forgot to call back. But going silent for an entire week was unusual. What worried him even more was that his 23-year-old half-brother, who lived with their mother, was also unreachable. When he arrived at the apartment, he knocked and rang the doorbell repeatedly, but no one answered. After some hesitation, he called a locksmith to open the digital lock. Inside, the home looked tidy and neat, just as his mother always kept it. But it was eerily quiet. Cautiously, he called out for his mother as he stepped toward the master bedroom. That's when he froze in shock. Beneath the bed covers, he could make out the outline of a human body. The blanket itself was stained dark red with dried blood. On the headboard above the bed, a large spray of blood was visible. Panicked, the son rushed forward and pulled back the blanket. It was his mother. She was already dead, her head bloodied from a violent blow. Her body had partially dried with clotted blood. But there was something even more disturbing. Her lower body was completely unclothed. And on her right foot, written in blood, were the Chinese characters for Chanwang, Heavenly King. Shaking uncontrollably, the son managed to call the police. Investigators arrived quickly and examined the apartment from the entrance to the balcony. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no evidence of a struggle. The house was orderly, with nothing overturned. Yet, during the search, officers found 400,000 won in cash and the victim's bank book hidden under the bed. If this had been a robbery, money would not have been left behind. Police immediately ruled out theft as a motive. The autopsy revealed the victim's skull had been crushed by repeated blows. The murder weapon lay at the foot of the bed, a blood-stained hammer, about 36 centimeters long, which came from the family's own toolbox. Given her undressed state, investigators suspected sexual assault. But strangely, there were no signs of resistance. From this, police concluded that the victim was struck with the hammer first, likely losing consciousness, and then assaulted while incapacitated. Taking all of this into account, investigators began to lean toward the theory that this was not just a random sexual crime, but rather a murder driven by personal resentment. The repeated blows to the head suggested intense rage, and since the weapon, a hammer from inside the home, was used, the killer likely knew the apartment well and had been there before. Police quickly focused their investigation on people close to the victim. Two primary suspects emerged: the victim's 55-year-old boyfriend, Mr. Kim, and her second son, Mr. O, who lived with her. While it was expected for the boyfriend to be questioned, the fact that her own son was now under suspicion was shocking. Based on the timeline, police believed the victim had been killed sometime after February 7th, the last day she was in contact with anyone, and before she was discovered on February 14th. So they examined the whereabouts of both suspects during that critical week. Tracking the boyfriend's phone records, police confirmed he was in a different city at the time of the murder. CCTV footage from the apartment complex also showed that he hadn't visited during that week. The only person seen entering the apartment was the victim's younger son, O. Even so, police hesitated. Could a son really assault his own mother in such a brutal way? The The sexual assault evidence made it even harder to believe. But there was something else. After the crime, O had reset his phone and left it on his desk before disappearing. Investigators believed this was an intentional move to erase evidence and avoid tracking. Still, suspicions grew. To find him, police turned to an unusual clue: his gaming habits. They traced his frequent logins through his gaming IP address and discovered that after the murder, he continued to access the game from an internet cafe in Uijeongbu district. Surveillance and questioning in that area led police to him. On the evening of February 26th, just 12 days after the crime, officers arrested O at the PC cafe. He offered no resistance, quietly standing up and following police out. In custody, he calmly confessed to everything. The horrifying truth was now undeniable. A son had murdered his own mother and then assaulted her body. For the police, it was a reality almost too grim to believe. To understand the case more fully, we need to look at O's past. The victim had given birth to her first son during her first marriage, but the relationship quickly ended in divorce. Later, she remarried and had her second son, O. Unfortunately, this marriage also turned turbulent, filled with conflict, and eventually ended in separation. When the marriage broke apart, O's living situation became uncertain. Neither parent took full custody of him, leaving him without a permanent home. He was passed between relatives' houses and social welfare facilities. At one point, he stayed in a youth shelter where he received counseling. Records from that time revealed a disturbing pattern. He often expressed intense anger toward his mother. He even once declared, without hesitation, "Someday I'll kill her." Shockingly, the counselor at the time did not treat this as a serious threat, instead dismissing it as the rebellious talk of a wounded teenager scarred by his parents' divorce and instability. By the time O turned 14, his mother brought him back home to live with her. Before that, he had also lived with his father, who struggled with alcoholism and other issues. Eventually, responsibility for him fell back to his mother. But even then, the fractured relationship between mother and son never truly healed. His mother was preoccupied with survival, working hard to make ends meet. She had little time or emotional energy to mend the deep wounds her son carried. Raising her first child had felt easier, and she assumed her second would also improve with time. Adding to the strain, she was now living with another man, and their frequent arguments only made the household more chaotic. During these heated quarrels, O often slipped out of the house and spent time at a nearby church. The church wasn't so much a spiritual refuge as it was simply a place where someone like him, adrift and unwanted, could feel accepted. But this unstable home life left its mark. O grew increasingly withdrawn, unable to connect with classmates or build friendships. His grades plummeted, and eventually, he dropped out of high school altogether. Yet beneath all these struggles was something far more serious. O was suffering from schizophrenia. Known today as a form of psychotic disorder, it typically begins to show symptoms in the late teenage years, after an otherwise normal childhood. People with schizophrenia often cannot clearly separate reality from delusion, suffering from hallucinations and voices only they can hear. This makes adapting to society extremely difficult. After dropping out of high school, O cut himself off from the outside world almost entirely. Around that time, his mother's live-in partner left, leaving only the two of them in the apartment. As he entered his 20s, O developed just one main hobby: playing computer games. He would spend nearly the entire day shut in his room, gaming nonstop. To his mother, Miss Kim, this was unbearable. "How can my son, at 23 be living like this?" she would think. Frustrated, she lashed out at him with harsh words. At times, she would say things like, "I must have been cursed to give birth to someone like you." To her, it was just angry outbursts spoken in the heat of the moment. But to O, they cut deeply, reopening old wounds. He already carried resentment toward his mother for abandoning him in childhood. Now, hearing constant criticism, even attacks on his very existence, his feelings hardened into rage. With schizophrenia clouding his mind, that anger only grew more unstable. Eventually, the resentment turned into resolve. The dark thoughts he had expressed since adolescence, his threats that one day he would kill his mother, were no longer idle words. In his mind, he had decided, "I can't take this anymore. I'll go through with it. And I'll make it brutal." On February 7th, the day of the crime, his mother returned home from work in the early hours of the morning. Exhausted, she collapsed into bed, but soon got up again to prepare breakfast for her son. "Come eat," she called. They ate together in near silence, neither saying much. After finishing the meal, her son retreated back into his room. After washing a few dishes, his weary mother returned to her bedroom and drifted into a deep sleep. A little later, her son quietly pushed open her door. Seeing that she was sound asleep, he stepped away, pulled on a mask and cap, then fetched a hammer from the toolbox in the small room. He returned to the bedroom and stood over the bed. His mother lay there, unaware of what was coming. He pulled the blanket up to cover her face, not out of guilt or tenderness, but simply to shield himself from the spray of blood. Then, without hesitation, he raised the hammer and brought it down. Again and again, he struck through the blanket. Blood quickly seeped through the fabric, spreading across the bed and splattering the walls. Inside the covers, his mother convulsed weakly, then fell still. Believing she was dead, O paused to catch his breath. But then, through the blanket, he noticed one of her legs had slipped free, exposed, and then, unthinkably, an urge surfaced, a forbidden, twisted desire. It wasn't only sexual, it was also fueled by years of pent-up rage toward his mother. Media reports later confirmed what happened, though the more graphic details were withheld. He attempted to assault her, but there was a problem. His mother was still alive. Barely clinging to life, she groaned weakly. Realizing she was still breathing, he committed an even more brutal act. He pressed the blanket down over her face until she stopped moving. Only after confirming her death did he continue. In an incomprehensible display, he dipped his finger in her blood and scrawled characters on her foot. The word was Cheonwang, Heavenly King. To this day, the meaning behind it has never been explained. Afterward, O seemed satisfied. He walked into the living room, picked up the remote, and spent the next 4 hours watching television as though nothing had happened. There was no trace of guilt. On the contrary, he seemed pleased, finally free from his mother's nagging, able to sit undisturbed in the living room. When evening fell, he stood up, took his mother's bank card from her wallet, and left the apartment. He went into town, bought a gaming console, then moved on to a PC cafe. Later, when bored, he drifted to a comic book rental shop. For the next week, he wandered between places, never returning home. Whether he was avoiding the crime scene or simply enjoying his newfound freedom remains unclear. It wasn't until his older brother came searching that the murder was discovered. 9 days later, O was arrested. The crime shocked the nation. How could a son do this to his own mother? Yet one detail remained central to the case. O suffered from schizophrenia. This fact weighed heavily in court. Standing trial, he admitted to all charges. The first trial court recognized his diminished mental capacity and sentenced him to 20 years in prison. Prosecutors, however, argued the punishment was far too light and filed an appeal. In October 2010, the appeals court handed down a new ruling. They overturned the original sentence and imposed life imprisonment. The judges explained, killing and sexually assaulting one's own mother was a crime beyond humanity, worthy of the death penalty. But because of his diminished capacity due to mental illness, they reduced the punishment to life in prison. The judges themselves felt that a 20-year sentence was far too light. That's why they finalized the life imprisonment ruling. Since 2010, O has remained behind bars. But while researching this case, I was forced to confront a colder truth. In Korea, crimes of sexual violence committed against mothers by their own children occur more often than people might imagine. Because these crimes happen within families, they are rarely made public. And when the victim is the mother, some even choose to stay silent, thinking, "He's still my son." Even in court, many mothers plead for leniency for their children. It's impossible to fathom the torment these women endure, suffering such unspeakable crimes not from strangers, but from their own flesh and blood. In today's case, no matter how resentful or cold the mother might have seemed, she was still the one who gave her son life, the one who raised him from the age of 14 until 23. Whatever happened inside their household, none of us can truly judge. Quarrels, resentment, and anger between parents and children. These exist in every family. Perhaps in this tragedy, it wasn't just long-harbored anger, but also the presence of schizophrenia that pushed things over the edge. Back in 2010, the importance of consistent psychiatric treatment and medication was far less emphasized than it is today. And so, this horrific crime seems to be the product of many factors colliding: unresolved resentment, mental illness, and neglect, all leading to a devastating outcome. Back in 2010, the importance of consistent psychiatric medication and counseling wasn't as strongly emphasized as it is today. Only in more recent years has awareness grown. In the end, it seems this tragedy was the result of many factors colliding: unresolved resentment, mental illness, and neglect, leading to a devastating outcome. Keep your loved ones close and keep them safe. Thank you for watching.